Okay, so we have very good reason to think the New Testament documents are reliable. We now understand what the genre was, right? They weren't writing science fiction, right? These were, how did you put it?
They're writing they're ancient biographies, is what
Right,
the Gospels were. Yeah.
right. Okay, so then here's what I want to do. I want to get into the resurrection right now. Suppose you have like a minute to explain to me what happened to Christ, how he was killed, what happened, why he was killed, and the story of the resurrection. Just kind of break that down really briefly for us, and then I want to dig into it.
Well, if I only had a minute, and we can unpack it, but if I only had a minute, I'd say, we're all biased. Every one of us is biased in certain ways. Some of us want the resurrection to happen, some not. Some of us really couldn't care less. So what we want to do is we want to really put a check on our bias. Let's consider those facts that for which the data is so strong to support them that a nearly universal consensus of today's scholars agree on them. And that way we kind of rule out bias here. Okay, so you've got Jesus' death by crucifixion, and shortly after, a number of his disciples had experiences they interpreted as appearances of the risen Jesus to them. And number three, a persecutor of the church named Paul likewise had an experience while he was persecuting the church that he interpreted as an appearance of the risen Jesus to him. Now, these are pretty benign facts here, but they're facts upon which virtually everyone agrees. Now, what you do is you formulate a hypothesis, various hypotheses to account for those experiences that led them to believe Jesus had been raised and appeared to them, right? Well, if they actually had these experiences and believed it, they weren't lying. If they actually had these experiences, it wasn't a legend that developed over time. So what was it? You got hallucinations, you got a number of other explanations, and the resurrection hypothesis is the only hypothesis that can account for those facts in an adequate manner. That's what I would say in a minute.
Okay, so let's just throw a few objections out. Jesus didn't really die. It appeared that he died. Maybe he was unconscious and eventually woke up.
Yeah. Well, that was somewhat popular a little over 100 years ago, but it has been nearly universally rejected today by contemporary scholars, even skeptical ones. It's rare, extremely rare, to find a scholar who will propose this, and for a number of reasons. Number one, Jesus' death by crucifixion is it's attested in multiple independent sources. So not only do you have Paul, who's probably our earliest source, or perhaps is our earliest source, you've got it in all four Gospels. So you have multiple independent Christian sources. You've got it in unsympathetic sources like Tacitus, Josephus, Lucian, Mara bar Serapion. There's even an embarrassing element to it, because when you read the ancient Jewish martyrdom literature, even the ancient Christian martyrdom literature, the martyrs come and they're very bold. Like in 2 Maccabees chapter 7, you've got 7 Jewish brothers who are being tortured to death in unspeakable ways because they won't submit to the Seleucid king's edict or command at that time to eat pork. And at one point, you've got one of the Jewish brothers who's had the skin peeled off his head and his tongue cut out. They're going to cut off his hands and feet next, and he holds them out and he says to the king, "Go ahead and take these, because I'm going to receive them back in the resurrection. But for you, O king, there will be no resurrection." Well, then that's like, whoa, he's trash talking the king, Of course, later on, you recognize these kinds of things. Some of them are embellishments, amplifications, because how do you say this to the king without a tongue,
Mm-hmm.
So you find this kind of stuff in the Christian literature. So and then right before the Jewish martyrs die, they will pray and they'll say something like, "God, I did not forsake your law." So what happens with Jesus? Is he trash talking the Romans or the Jewish authorities? No. In fact, right before he's arrested, he's saying, "Father, if it's your will, let this cup pass from me." He wants out if possible. Kind of embarrassing, because just shortly before that, he told his disciples, "If you want to be my disciple, you got to take up your cross and follow me." And now when it's time for Jesus to pick up his, he wants out. And then when he's on the cross, he doesn't say, "God, I have I have not forsaken your law.
Right.
He says, my God, why have you forsaken me?
Right. So in other words, if these were the writings of merely kind of Christian fanaticists, zealots, they wouldn't be including these apparently embarrassing details.
That's exactly
They'd
right.
be doing the opposite. Yeah.
Hey, if you enjoyed that clip, you will absolutely love the full interview, so click right there to enjoy the whole thing. Also, a big thanks to these groups who made that interview possible. Learn more in the show notes below about these guys. They're absolutely incredible and honored to have them as sponsors. Oh, and also, if you haven't subscribed yet, click subscribe and then that bell button. That way YouTube will be forced to let you know when we put out more content.